Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, and I am streaming live from my podcast studio at the Team Needham abode. And I am super excited to have Dr. Jay Wrigley on our show today. While we wait to get him on, I'd like to make a couple notes about what we're going to be talking about. Let me just stream the banner a little bit. We'll be discussing... Dr. Jay Wrigley wrote a book called The Hormone Optimization Diet. And as you guys know, Janet and I at Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy, we talk a lot about hormones. And we always do discuss with our patients how hormones are a piece of the puzzle. You can't just take hormones and magically get better, whether it be for your mental health or your physical health. You have to have a good diet also. And of course, you have to exercise and sleep also. That's a topic for a whole nother podcast. So while we wait to get Jay on our show, here's his website about his hormone optimization diet. But what I wanted to mention is that the diet is like hormones are like and we've talked about this analogy before on our podcast, actually a few weeks ago, when Matt was on our podcast. And hormones are like a contractor at a job site. So hormones tell everything where to go, whether it be the wood or whether it be the plumbing or whether it be the fixtures. The hormones tell everything where everything needs to be put into place. But our food, our diet, it is the structure of a building of our bodies, so to speak. So if we don't have a good strong foundation, a good strong structure, doesn't matter what kind of hormones we're on, they won't work optimal. So it's important to have a good healthy diet. And what does that mean? I will, and Jay gets on, he'll talk a little bit more about it as we're working to get him on. Protein. Let's talk about testosterone, for instance. Testosterone helps to build lean body mass. But if you don't have enough protein, then you're not going to be able to build lean body mass. Now, even if it's not, and there are some proteins that are essential, some that are non-essential. So the best protein sources, if you want to build good lean mass, is meat. Sorry, vegans and vegetarians out there. It is much easier to build lean mass and to build muscle with meat products than it is with plant-based products. There are certain proteins that plants lack that meat has. So I'm a big believer in mostly a meat-based diet to optimize our hormones and to optimize our health in general. I think if you look at evolutionarily speaking over generations, we ate mostly meat, and we ate plants. We were hunters and gatherers, and we ate plants only when we had to, and when we didn't have something that we had hunted and killed and had large portions of meat. So I also think when we talk about hormones, we talk about hormone optimization diet, we have to speak about the effect of insulin. Yes, insulin is a hormone. Insulin is definitely a hormone, and if we have too much of it, we can have type 2 diabetes. Have too little of it, and you have type 1 diabetes. They manifest differently. In a lot of ways, the medications prescribed are different, but the diet to manage type 1 and type 2 diabetes is very similar, in my opinion. You know, it's a carbohydrate metabolism problem, so you do have to eat less carbs, and watch what you eat and exercise, and it's a carbohydrate metabolism problem. So, but insulin, why do I talk about insulin as a hormone? Because I think I used to talk about how there were basically three different body systems when we talk about hormones, and it was your adrenal glands, thyroid, and our sex hormones. So our adrenal glands are above renal, kidney. So they're little pea-sized glands that sit on top of our kidneys, and they make hormones in response to stress. So specifically, if you adrenaline is associated with that gland. So fight or flight hormone immediately. Adrenaline is what do you need right now, immediately. And then cortisol, more specifically, is more for long-term stress over the day, follows a diurnal variation. What does that mean? Cortisol should be produced in a diurnal variation, which means highest in the morning, slowly going down throughout the day, being lowest at like 2 o'clock in the morning when we should be sleeping, REM sleep. Now, if your adrenal glands are shot and they're not working right, your cortisol will be really low in the morning. And that means that you won't be able to get out of bed. You'll be very tired. It'll be hard to be active during the day. Our adrenal glands prepare us for the stressors of the day, whether it be mental stress or whether it be physical stress. So if your cortisol is too low in the morning, you'll have a hard time getting out of bed. If it's too high at night, you'll have a hard time going to sleep. So they're important things to do to make sure that your cortisol follows that diurnal variation, which basically means you need to follow diurnal variation, means we work during the day, we're active during the day, and we sleep at night and get a regular pattern of that. So I used to say that adrenals were on the top. If your adrenals weren't healthy, your thyroid wasn't going to be healthy, and then your sex hormones weren't going to be healthy. So testosterone and estrogen, progesterone, when I talk about sex hormones. And the adrenals trumped everything, because we can't live without adrenals. If you don't have your adrenal glands, you will die instantly. Thyroid gland, that's the second one in the hierarchy. Without our thyroid, we can live without our thyroid, although we won't feel optimal. Now, we do probably need medication, thyroid medication replacement, if we don't have a thyroid, but we can live without our thyroid. And our sex hormones. We can live without sex hormones. There are men that live without their testes because of testicular cancer. There are women that live without their ovaries because of ovarian cancer. So we can definitely live without those. Won't be very fun, and we'll probably have to replace them to feel the most optimal, but we'll live without them. We can't live without our adrenals. But Dr. Amy Beard, who has been on our podcast before, she is a wonderful functional medicine doctor out of Arkansas. I've met her, and we've had a couple podcast sessions with her. She is the one that taught me that insulin, it really trumps all of those. So insulin as a hormone trumps all those. If our insulin response is not good, means our metabolic response is not good. So if our insulin levels are high, none of those other things will get better. So when I talk hormone optimization diet, I think it's important to discuss how important our insulin response is. So if you don't know what your insulin level is, then you need to get it checked. Now, most traditional doctors don't know much about it, and they might even foo-foo against it. But when they routinely check you for diabetes, they check a fasting blood glucose. And many people will have a normal fasting blood glucose, even though they're really pre-diabetic. Because insulin is what because those patients' insulins, their pancreas is still making enough insulin that it's keeping their glucose low. So many times people have pre-diabetes for 10, 15, 20 years before their glucose actually starts to show up as abnormal and in the pre-diabetic range, because their pancreas is still working. So I think insulin is a more important marker for diabetes and especially overall metabolic health than fasting blood glucose, because fasting blood glucose doesn't always tell the whole picture, kind of like a lot of labs don't. Remember, we need to look at labs as a tool, not as a tool to treat patients, the overall health of the patient, not just to treat, a lab number. For instance, glucose. So glucose can run high for people that are very active. So I've used a continuous glucose monitor before, and I am an endurance mountain bike racer. So I'll have 5-hour races sometimes. When I am riding my bike, my average glucose is between 130 and 150. It runs about 140 when I'm riding my bike. And that's regardless of if I'm fasting while riding my bike, and it's regardless of, or if I'm eating carbohydrates, it's regardless. My body is producing a bunch of glucose because I'm burning it. It says, okay, you need this glucose, so we're going to make more glucose so you burn it. So Um, that doesn't mean I'm a diabetic. So when I check my average glucose is like 110 to 115. That would be a pre-diabetic range. But one of the reasons it's so high is because my body produces more glucose because it knows I'm going to burn it during exercise. Now, when I check my insulin response, my insulin is super low. I don't need a lot of insulin. Insulin is released in our pancreas to help to lower glucose, take glucose out of our blood and bring it into our cells. Well, if you're burning the glucose, you don't need a lot of insulin. So if you're active and you're burning the glucose in your blood, you don't need a bunch of insulin released to take that insulin out. So my insulin is low, but my glucose is a little bit higher. So if somebody didn't know me and didn't know how to interpret those lab levels, they might think I'm pre-diabetic. Now, here's the most important thing when it comes to, we just talked about how labs are a tool to go along with symptoms and history. The most important thing is, being metabolically healthy. We can usually tell by looking in the mirror. Okay, so you can do all these fancy lab tests, and you can chase your cholesterol numbers, and you can chase your glucose numbers, and you can chase your insulin. But in reality, it's like when you look in the mirror, do you look healthy? Are you a healthy body weight? And not necessarily body weight, but body composition. Do you have a healthy amount of lean body mass? And not too much body fat. That's what's important is body composition, not necessarily weight, because BMI, body mass index, basically is height and weight. And many times people with a lot of lean body mass, I'm one of them, can be on those scales and look almost obese because your weight is high based on your height and because you're carrying a lot of lean body mass. And lean body mass is actually much more dense than fat. Obviously, think about it. Fat is oil, kind of, and it's not very dense because it floats on, it'll float on water. So think about it that way. So it's ideal body composition, what's important. So your waist size, any woman that has a waist size over 35 has increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Any man that has a waist size of over 40, increased risk of cardiovascular disease. So those are some other markers that you can use if you're healthy rather than just, fancy labs. So what is your insulin response? That's what's really important when it comes to hormone optimization, in my opinion. Because if you don't have a healthy insulin response, if your insulin's super high, then you are not going to be able to have optimal thyroid. You're not going to be able to have optimal adrenal response. Because what happens when your glucose is high? Well, your cortisol is probably going to be high, so your stress hormones are going to be high. And then it's really hard to get everything else into balance. So that's why diet is so important. So I already mentioned how exercise affects insulin. You don't need as much insulin if you exercise. Now, I'm not saying everyone needs to ride their bike 5 hours a day, which I do not do that, by the way. But even 2 hours a day, I'm not saying you have to exercise 2 hours a day to be healthy and have healthy hormones. Diet is more important than exercise. Diet trumps exercise. We will die without food. We do not have to exercise to stay to live. We have to have food to live. So if your insulin is high, or if your glucose is high for that matter, if your glucose is high and you're not a type 1 diabetic, then chances are, and type 1 diabetics, you don't make enough insulin, then chances are your insulin is going to be high if you're not on medication. But that's okay, because type 2 diabetes is easily reversible. Okay, maybe not easily reversible. It is reversible without medications. I'm a pharmacist. My wife is a pharmacist. We are two pharmacists who do not believe in medications to treat type 2 diabetes, period. It is a carbohydrate metabolism issue. It can be fixed with your lifestyle, period. If you are talking to your doctor, if you're type 2 diabetic and your doctor says that type 2 diabetes isn't reversible, get a new doctor. Seriously. I really seriously mean that. Okay, so what can you do if you're a type 2 diabetic and you don't want to exercise 2 hours a day? Well, diet is the most important. Remember, it's a carbohydrate metabolism problem. So you can just go low carb. You don't have to go low carb, high fat. You don't have to do that at all. You don't have to do keto diet. I'm not saying that you couldn't do that. You got to find out what works for you. But I think what you need to do is be cognizant of eating carbs, especially processed carbs. Now, if you are a type 2 diabetic, I think just carbs in general. You probably don't need a banana. Yes, I said it. You probably don't need an apple. And you definitely don't need it, because we can definitely live without apples, bananas, and fresh fruit. We definitely can. If I was a type 2 diabetic, I would recommend you eat very, very, very little fruits, and stay away from most vegetables, honestly, because they can spike your glucose. That's where glucose comes from. I would focus on high protein and fat. And if you focus on a red meat diet, you'll probably get a lot of that. You'll get you'll get a lot of protein for sure, and you will get some fat depending on how lean of cuts of meat you eat. Now, if you focus on chicken is basically pure protein, very little fat, especially if you eat chicken breasts, which is the white meat. That's going to be less calories also, which chances are, if you're type 2 diabetic, calories are important. And so, because you're probably overweight, not always, but probably overweight, so leaner portions of meat is probably better. I get it. You keto people out there that talk about, high fat, I get that. That's a topic for a whole other conversation. I'm not saying it's bad. But I think sometimes initially, depending on how metabolically unhealthy you are, keto can be very important when you kick yourself into ketosis. But you don't have to eat high fat to kick yourself into ketosis. You really have to eat low carb is what's important for ketosis. That's what makes you start burning other things besides glycogen, glucose in your body. So that's how you can stabilize your insulin. Go low carb. Eat low carb. Bread, tortillas, out of the question. Don't eat them. Pasta, don't eat it. Just be cognizant of it. And if it comes from a box, in general, don't ever eat it. I'm not saying I don't do that, but stay away from those processed foods. Focus on meat, and your glucose will start to come down. In fact, if you're on medication that can lower your glucose, you need to be very careful when you change your diet, because that will be a problem, because your glucose will start coming down. So that is the best way to normalize your insulin levels, is with diet, a low carb diet. And here's another thing, fasting. So if you have a doctor that lies to you and tells you that type 2 diabetes is not reversible, I want you to prove them wrong. I want you to fast for 24 to 48 hours. Yeah, it might not be very fun, especially the first 24 hours. Once you get past 24, it's pretty easy to go to 48. But if you're on any medication that will lower your glucose, please consult with your doctor or pharmacist about how to go about that process. If you're on insulin, you're going to have to be very, very, very careful and use a lot less insulin. So to prove your doctor wrong about how type 2 diabetes is reversible, do this with him, or do this: fast for 24 to 48 hours. I guarantee you, your glucose will come back down to normal, as well as your insulin. Probably insulin might take a little bit longer, but it's going to come back down to normal. That right there is proof that type 2 diabetes is reversible. The nice thing about that is only take 24 to 48 hours to prove to yourself that you can beat this disease. You can beat this diagnosis. You don't need to be on medication the rest of your life. So it's a great way to show yourself and to give yourself inspiration about that type 2 diabetes is reversible. So it looks like we have a comment here. What do we got going on here? Laura Vest Turner, thank you so much for your comment. Thank you for watching today. Laura, you can't take a pill to fix a bad diet. Absolutely not. Low carb keto would be very helpful for most Americans. Absolutely. Stay away from anything with a barcode. Yes, that is so true, Laura. Thank you for your comment. Laura has a very inspirational story. She lost like 135 pounds going keto. If you follow her, she's got Keto Laura on Facebook. Look her up, and you can find her on Facebook, Laura Best Turner, and she has a keto group that she has. It's she does recipes and things. It's awesome. Thank you, Laura, for your comment. And there is also, on that note, no pill that can change a bad diet. That is so true. Keto Life with Laura. I should know that. I see it every day. But Keto Life with Laura, it's her keto group. Thank you, Laura. There is no pill that can fix a bad diet. Also, there is no exercise that can fix a bad diet. You cannot exercise your way out of a bad diet. Okay. So if you're not eating correctly, it doesn't matter how much you exercise. It is not going to fix your issues. There's 3 things that we can do to stay healthy. When we talk about hormone optimization diet, we have to talk about all these. It's sleep, it's exercise, and it's diet in general. The most important, a lot of people say, if I want to be if I want to be in the best shape of my life, I've got to exercise. No, that's not the most important. You talk to top mountain bike racers, you talk to top baseball players, top bodybuilders. The most important thing they do is their diet. Because remember, that's what we do. We eat more than, during the day than we exercise. Most of us only exercise 30 minutes a day. I mean, true exercise at the gym, which most of us have sedentary jobs now. So really we have to get our activity in. We have to schedule it. So we have to ride our bike, or we have to go to the gym. And most of us don't do that more than an hour a day. Well, I know overall, we don't maybe eat 3-4 hours all day long, but we spend more time preparing food, thinking about it, and that than we do exercise. So, and here's the thing: we will die. You do not have to exercise to stay alive. Period. Now, yes, you'll be healthier if you exercise, but obviously, if you don't eat, you'll die. Now, let's talk about sleep. Sleep trumps all of them. If you are not sleeping, you will not have healthy hormones. You will not be healthy overall, because we will die without sleep before we'll die without food. Most of us can live without food for 3 weeks. I mean, we have a good storage system of fat, and our bodies are good at storing fat to prepare us for times of fasting. So most of us can live for 3 weeks without food, 3 days without sleep, and you'll literally go psycho if you don't have sleep. So sleep trumps them all. And yes, for you night shift workers out there, I'm sorry, but we're made to sleep during the night and work during the day. And if you are having hormone type issues, and you are a night shift worker, or you are a shift worker, you need to change your shift. We work during the day and we sleep at night. And I see this many times with women that are menopausal, and you try to balance their hormones, and it is just very, very difficult. And I hats off to you guys that work nights, but we're made to work during the day and sleep at night. So, and I think especially as we get older, I think as we get younger, I used to do shift work as a pharmacist at a hospital when I was younger, and I didn't do it much into my 30s at all, I don't think. But it caught up to me as I got into my later 20s, because it's just much more difficult to regulate that circadian rhythm as we get older. And part of that is because of our hormones start to decline. So, yeah, sleep trumps it all. If you're not sleeping, doesn't really matter what you eat or what you exercise. You're not sleeping, your cortisol stays high. Cortisol is that stress hormone. Cortisol prepares us for stress, so it helps us hold on to fat, hold on to water, to prepare us to run from a lion, or what we used to do centuries ago. But we don't need it in our day-to-day lives normally. So if your cortisol is constantly high and it's not coming down, then it's very, very difficult to lose weight and to optimize your overall health. So let's see, specific when it comes to diet, I think the most important part is that if it doesn't rot, don't eat it. Laura kind of said it, with stay away from anything with a barcode. What does that mean? I mean, if you can scan at the grocery store and it has a barcode, that probably means it has a ton of preservatives in it. And I'm not saying preservatives aren't bad. Preservatives have probably saved lives over many centuries from, preventing food poisoning. Possibly you could argue that if we always ate fresh food and we didn't let it go bad in the first place, it would not be an issue. I agree with that. So the fresher the food you eat, the better. The less processed, the better. I get it. We had Dr. Kilter on our show a few months ago, and he's a big proponent of the carnivore diet. And he says, well, of course I eat processed food. He eats meat only. He said, but I don't go out and kill my own meat and process it. He goes to a local butcher. So, and that's what we do. We go to a local butcher. We love our local butcher, Post 5 Cattle Company out of Ephrata, Washington. They are awesome. For any of our local viewers and listeners that are watching, they amazing. We go through. We have two young boys. I should say young men. Sorry, they're 23 and 20, almost 21, and they eat a lot of meat, and they are independent and don't live at home anymore. But one of our rules is, you can come over and help yourself to the freezer all you want with meat, and we go through one full beef in 4 months. So two big kids, they 210 plus pounds, 6'4", 6'3". So big kids, they eat a lot of meat, and I'm glad. I'm glad that they can use us as a source for that. So, but yeah. So about on the fasting thing, also, I think when you start learning to fast, I'm a big believer. I do. My wife and I, we both eat about one meal a day. We basically eat dinner. We skip breakfast. We skip lunch, and we eat a big dinner, mostly meat-based dinner. And so our body, our glucose during the day is getting lower, burning all the stuff from the night before. Insulin goes lower, so our hormones start to regulate our system based on fasting. And I believe when you look at the history of our bodies, evolutionarily speaking, I believe that we were in a fasting state much of the time. That's why we're good at storing fat. And that's why obesity is epidemic in America, because we mostly have too much food and we're eating too much all the time. So we were made to be able to fast days at a time, actually. So I think fasting is very, very important, and eat around your activity. So, I did a mountain bike race, a stage race over the weekend, 3 days, a stage race. Each race was about 25 miles or so. So a little less than 3 hours to finish the race. Obviously, I cannot fast while I'm doing those races, and I can't fast before and after. I have to fuel for those races. We should fuel around our activity. And I think, historically speaking, when we look at our grandparents, for instance, now many centuries ago, it wasn't the same, but because we were actually having to hunt for our food. But even 2 or 3 generations ago, in the 50s and 60s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, when you look at how our grandparents ate, they did eat breakfast, they did eat lunch, and they did eat dinner. So what has changed over the last 3 centuries, or over the last 50 to 60, 70 years? Obesity wasn't a problem then. Well, if you look at what my grandparents did, they largely were agriculture-based community, so they were farmers, so they were moving all the time, up at the crack of dawn at 5 o'clock in the morning. Of course, they needed breakfast because they were moving, burning it out all throughout the day. They weren't just sitting in an office space in front of a computer like I do most of the time. So when you look at them and say, oh, breakfast is the most important part of the day, they ate breakfast, they weren't healthy, or they were healthy, they weren't obese. Yeah, but let's look at what kind of activity they were doing, because their jobs usually weren't sedentary. So, well, we weren't able to get Dr. Jay Wrigley on. We will reach out to him and talk to him more about his diet. We've had him on before, and we had some technical difficulty, and he actually was not able. His internet went out or something, or he lost power or something. So, but go ahead and check him out, Dr. Jay Wrigley's Hormone Optimization Diet. I hit on a few of the things that he would discuss, but again, realize that hormones are a piece of the puzzle. Diet and your overall lifestyle is very, very important. Without the building blocks, those hormones don't have have the necessary structure to tell the things where to go in your body to be healthy. So thanks for watching today. Thanks for all the comments. We appreciate you guys. Do not miss out tomorrow. We're having 2 podcasts in a row. Day to day, our midweek podcast will be tomorrow. Dr. Kelly Victory. Super excited to have her on. She is a frequent guest on the Dr. Drew Show. If you guys, any of you Generation Xers like me that grew up watching MTV and watching Dr. Drew, she is on his podcast quite frequently and discusses early treatment. And we're going to be discussing the big pharma and how big pharma has kind of hijacked our medical schools and pharmacy schools. I've discussed that before in our podcast. And as you guys might know, Janet and I are 2 pharmacists that don't believe in drugs to treat long-term disease. Wow, isn't that weird? Yeah, we really don't. When you look at cardiovascular disease, for instance, in the United States, when you look at diabetes, like we were just talking about, the drugs that we're giving to people, it's not working. I don't care what kind of science you want to give me about these drugs and all that. I don't care. Really, honestly, as a pharmacist, this sounds really arrogant or maybe even ignorant. But when one of these new diabetes drugs comes out, I just let it go in one ear and out the other ear. It is not a solution to type 2 diabetes. I don't care how they work. It's a diet related problem. So Janet and I, it's very powerful that 2 pharmacists do not believe in drugs to treat long-term disease. That's very, very powerful. And we're using that to our advantage to educate and empower individuals to take charge of their own health. So another thing, cardiovascular disease, statins, the high cholesterol drugs, they're not working. Heart attacks and strokes are at an all-time high in the United States, and statins have been out for 30 years. They're not working. All these drugs for reflux or gastrointestinal problems. Let's face it, gastrointestinal problems are usually caused by a diet. Yes, I have gastrointestinal problems still when I eat too much. But I don't need a drug. I just need to realize that and not eat as much. So, but again, Laura said it with her comment about pill to fix a bad diet. There's many different diseases that can be caused by a bad diet. And what do? We just, big pharma comes up with, and our healthcare system comes up with another drug to treat a bad diet. Well, why don't we just fix the diet? So those are some things we're going to talk about tomorrow, is that how, big pharma has really hijacked our healthcare system. And instead of treating problems, we're just instead of fixing problems, we're just treating symptoms. So you don't want to miss out on that tomorrow with Kelly Victory. Go to we stream live on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And I want to make sure that you guys don't miss this. So I think it's at 8:30 tomorrow, but please go to, we have a Health Solutions Facebook page, Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham on our Facebook page. You can go to my personal Facebook page to find it also and find out when that podcast is. I think it's at 8:30 tomorrow with Kelly Victory. You do not want to miss out on that. So thank you for tuning in. Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. We'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you.